Have you ever found yourself completely confused when someone you were just getting close to suddenly pulls away? Maybe things were going well, they were warm, present, even vulnerable, and then out of nowhere, they go silent. They stop replying. They pull back emotionally or disappear into their own world. It leaves you wondering, what did I do wrong? Did I scare them off? Was it all in my head? Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and today we're going to talk about one of the most misunderstood and emotionally frustrating dynamics in relationships, what it actually means when an avoidantly attached person pulls away just as things start to get real. Because believe it or not, that withdrawal isn't always a sign they've stopped caring. In fact, it might be the opposite. It might be the exact moment they've started feeling too much. Their silence, their distance, sometimes that's not rejection, it's emotional panic. A nervous system going into survival mode in response to love that feels dangerously real. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, it might even sound a little maddening, but understanding this can completely change how you respond, not from a place of self-blame, but from grounded self-worth. In this video, I'm going to help you decode avoidant behavior from the inside out. We'll look at why closeness often triggers retreat in avoidance, why emotional intimacy feels like a threat to them, and how they express care in the most paradoxical ways through silence, distance, and tiny, almost invisible gestures. You'll also learn how to recognize when their pullback isn't about you, but about their internal overwhelm. You'll understand why they might watch your stories but not message, why they remember everything about you but pretend not to, and why your growth the moment you stop chasing shakes them more than any fight ever could. So if you're tired of mixed signals and emotional breadcrumbs and you're ready to stand in your truth without chasing love, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This is where we get clear, we get grounded, and we stop confusing emotional chaos with love. Let's dive in, because when an avoidant acts like this, it might mean they love you more than they can handle. 1. Reframing avoidant silence and withdrawal. Let's start by talking about something that causes so much confusion in relationships with avoidantly attached people: silence. The sudden withdrawal, the lack of texts, the "I need space" message that comes right after things were going well. If you've experienced this, your first instinct might be to assume they've lost interest or that you somehow messed things up. That's a natural reaction. Most of us are taught to associate closeness with connection and distance with disconnection. But in the world of avoidant attachment, the rules are flipped. The more emotional intimacy starts to build, the more their nervous system sees it as a threat. And what looks like disinterest is often something entirely different: emotional overload. Here's the truth that no one really tells you: avoidants don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because they care more than they know how to handle. Their system wasn't built for closeness, especially not the real kind, the kind that makes them feel seen, known, and emotionally open. That level of vulnerability, it feels dangerous. You might think you're just getting to know them better or moving forward in the relationship. But for them, it can feel like they're losing their grip on the emotional control they've spent a lifetime mastering. It's not a relationship issue, it's a nervous system response. Let me give you a real-life example. I worked with someone who had been dating an avoidant partner for a few months. Things seemed to be going well. They were spending weekends together, having long conversations, getting emotionally closer. Then, boom, the avoidant partner went cold. Barely replied to messages, cancelled plans, just dropped off emotionally. My client panicked. She thought she'd done something wrong. But what was really happening? That growing closeness had triggered his internal alarm system. The same emotional connection she was celebrating was for him a signal that things were getting out of control. His withdrawal wasn't punishment, it was a protective move, a way to regulate the emotional flood he didn't know how to sit with. See, for many avoidants, love feels like a loss of self. Somewhere in childhood or early life, they picked up the message that depending on others wasn't safe. Maybe they had caregivers who were emotionally unpredictable or who discouraged emotional expression. So now as adults, when they start needing someone caring too much or feeling emotionally exposed, it sets off an old subconscious warning: if I let you in, I might lose me. So they retreat, not to hurt you, but to protect their sense of control, their emotional safety. This is where a lot of anxious or emotionally open partners get caught in a painful loop. We think, if I just show them I care more, if I just wait it out, if I stay soft and patient, maybe they'll come back. And sometimes they do, but not because of our efforts. They come back when they've had time to regulate, to feel safe again. The mistake is thinking their silence means you did something wrong. What's actually happening is internal. They're not avoiding you, they're avoiding the intensity of their own emotional reaction to you. Now, let me be clear, this doesn't mean you should tolerate emotional neglect. Silence still hurts, and you deserve connection that doesn't feel like a game of emotional hide and seek. But it does help to know that their withdrawal isn't always about a lack of care. Often it's about too much care, paired with too little capacity to handle it. Once you start seeing their silence through this lens as an emotional shutdown, not rejection, you stop internalizing their behavior. You stop chasing clarity from someone who's drowning in confusion, and instead you ground yourself in truth. Their emotional crisis is not your fault, and your worth isn't determined by how available or unavailable someone else is. 2. Emotional distance as a survival strategy. Now that we've started to unpack avoidant silence as more of an emotional shutdown than a personal rejection, it's important to understand where this pattern comes from. Avoidant behavior doesn't just show up out of nowhere. It's often rooted in early life experiences, childhood environments where emotional vulnerability wasn't welcomed, or worse, was punished. Imagine growing up in a household where feelings were dismissed, ignored, or met with coldness. Maybe when the avoidant cried as a child, they were told to stop being dramatic or toughen up. Maybe affection was inconsistent, available one day, gone the next. So they learned a painful but powerful lesson: showing emotion isn't safe, and needing someone is dangerous. That's where the emotional distance begins, not as a conscious decision, but as a survival strategy. They learn early that being self-contained is safer than being vulnerable. They become experts at staying emotionally independent because in their mind, closeness equals risk. When they get older and start forming romantic relationships, that old programming doesn't just disappear. It shows up in their instinct to pull away the moment things start feeling too good or too real. What feels like connection to you might feel like exposure to them. I worked with a client whose avoidant boyfriend always seemed cool in the early stages of dating. He was easygoing, independent, and never too emotionally intense. But after they started getting closer, after she opened up about her feelings, and they began spending more consistent time together, he suddenly became distant. Calls slowed down. He became more distracted and vague. It confused her deeply. But what was happening underneath the surface was the emotional intimacy they were building was triggering his fear of losing control. Love to him wasn't something comforting, it felt destabilizing. His first impulse wasn't to lean in, it was to retreat. That's why emotional distance becomes a kind of armor for avoidance. They're not trying to punish their partner, they're trying to protect themselves from overwhelm, from the fear of being consumed, from the deep belief that if someone gets too close, they might lose themselves. So they create space, they shut down, they act indifferent, not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and they don't know how to express it safely. Here's where it gets even more complex. Avoidants often don't realize they're doing this. To them, pulling back feels like a rational choice. They'll say things like, I just need to focus on work, or I'm not good at relationships, or I need time to myself. And they might believe those statements, but beneath them is a deeper emotional truth they haven't yet learned to recognize. I'm scared of how much I care, and I don't know how to handle it without losing control. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing poor behavior. You still deserve emotional presence and consistency. but it does help you see that their distance is about them, not a reflection of your value. And when you stop personalizing it, you start setting the kind of boundaries that protect your peace without getting stuck in the spiral of trying to fix what was never yours to carry. 3. Mixed signals, micro-interactions, and breadcrumbing. Let's talk about one of the most frustrating parts of being connected to someone with an avoidant attachment style. The mixed signals, you know, the moments I'm talking about. They go quiet for days or weeks, and just when you're starting to move on, they pop up again. Maybe they like your photo from 3 weeks ago. Maybe they reply to your Instagram story with a random emoji, or they send a quick, "Hey, how have you been at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday?" It feels like they're reaching out, but not fully. There's no follow-up, no plans to reconnect, just a little nudge. And it leaves you wondering, do they still care, or are they just playing games? Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. These micro-interactions aren't random, they're what I call emotional Morse code, small cautious signals sent out to maintain a thread of connection without having to step fully into vulnerability. For the avoidant, it's safer to hover at the edges of intimacy than to re-enter the space fully. These little breadcrumbs aren't about commitment, they're not even necessarily about you. They're often about them trying to self-soothe to feel like they're not entirely disconnected without having to face the emotional intensity that real closeness would require. One client of mine described this perfectly. Her ex, who had disappeared for nearly a month with no explanation, started reacting to her stories again. No direct messages, no apology, just little interactions, liking a sunset photo here, watching a video there, and she was torn. Was he trying to come back? Was this his version of reaching out? The truth was yes, but not in the way she hoped. He wasn't initiating reconnection, he was regulating his own sense of emotional safety. Those micro-interactions gave him a sense of closeness without the risk of rejection or the pressure of explaining himself. It's important to recognize this behavior for what it is, not to demonize it, but to keep yourself grounded. These gestures are not necessarily manipulative, but they are avoidant. They often come from fear, not clarity. The avoidant wants to feel some kind of connection, but they don't want to face what that connection might demand of them emotionally. So if you're on the receiving end of breadcrumbing, take a step back. Ask yourself, do I want a full connection, or am I settling for emotional scraps? Your answer will help you stay anchored in your truth. You deserve more than digital echoes. You deserve presence, not just proximity. Understanding their motives gives you clarity, but it's your boundaries that will give you peace. 4. The push-pull dance. Now let's talk about what's often called the push-pull dance, a dynamic that's incredibly common when you're in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. It can be one of the most emotionally exhausting patterns to experience because it keeps you on edge, constantly questioning what's real and what's not. One day, they're affectionate, engaged, maybe even deeply connected. You have a meaningful conversation, share something vulnerable, and you think, finally, we're turning a corner. But then without warning, they pull away. They go cold, they stop texting, they act like nothing happened. And you're left wondering, if you imagine the whole thing, what's really going on here isn't about mind games or manipulation. It's about an internal emotional tug of war that the avoidant partner often doesn't even fully understand. On one hand, they crave connection just like anyone else. They want to be loved, to be seen, to feel safe with another person. But the moment it gets too close, their nervous system registers it as danger. Closeness feels like a loss of control. Their internal alarm system goes off. If I let you in, I'll lose myself. If I depend on you, I could get hurt. So they retreat, not because the moment wasn't meaningful, but because it was too meaningful. It overwhelmed their capacity to stay regulated. That emotional dysregulation is often misread as coldness or detachment, But really, it's a self-protective move. They're not trying to play with your emotions, they're trying to calm down their own. Unfortunately, that leaves you in a painful position, longing for reconnection, replaying what happened, trying to figure out how something that felt so real could be followed by silence. One woman I worked with shared that after an incredibly intimate weekend with her partner, talking about dreams, fears, even the idea of a future together, he disappeared for an entire week. No texts, no calls. When he finally resurfaced, he acted like everything was normal. It hurt her deeply. But once we unpacked the avoidant pattern, it became clear he wasn't pretending the weekend didn't matter. It had mattered so much that it triggered all his fears. Understanding this push-pull cycle doesn't mean you should tolerate being jerked around, but it does give you insight. It helps you take a step back and remember this isn't about your worth, this is about their wounds, and you get to choose whether you want to keep dancing or step out of the pattern entirely. 5. Emotional memory and their invisible presence. Now here's a part of the avoidant dynamic that surprises a lot of people. They remember more than you think. Even though they may act detached or emotionally checked out, avoidantly attached people often carry a surprisingly rich emotional memory. They notice the little things. They remember that song you said reminds you of your childhood, the nickname you gave their pet, or the exact way you looked when you opened up about your fears. The issue isn't that they don't feel, it's that feeling deeply threatens the emotional control they've spent their whole life building. You might think they forgot your birthday because they didn't mention it, or that they didn't care about that heartfelt message you sent because they never replied. But often, the forgetfulness isn't real. It's a defense mechanism. If they acknowledge the emotional significance of those moments, they're forced to feel more deeply, and that vulnerability feels risky. So they compartmentalize, they shut it down, they act like it didn't happen, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. One woman I coached shared that after a long emotional phone call, where she opened up about her past, her avoidant partner went quiet for a few days. When he finally texted her again, it wasn't to talk about the conversation, it was just a funny meme she'd once laughed at. She was confused. But in that moment, he was doing something avoidants often do, reaching out through safe, familiar references. That meme was his way of saying, I remember. I'm still here. Not with full emotional presence, but in a way that felt less risky for him. Another important thing to note is how they react when you start to pull away. Avoidants often seem indifferent, but they're incredibly sensitive to emotional distance. If you stop initiating, if you begin reclaiming your energy and focusing on yourself, they usually notice acutely. And while they may not come running back with big romantic gestures, they'll often reach out in small, subtle ways. A random "hey, I like" on your photo, a casual check-in. It's their version of testing the waters. Understanding this helps you stop misreading their silence as total emotional detachment. You can see the full picture. They may not show emotion in obvious ways, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And while that knowledge can bring comfort, it's also a reminder to stay grounded. You deserve full presence, not just invisible echoes of someone who doesn't know how to fully show up yet. 6. The avoidance emotional crisis when you stop chasing. One of the most pivotal moments in an avoidant empath dynamic happens when you stop chasing. When you stop over-explaining yourself, stop trying to fix the relationship, stop managing both sides of the emotional connection, and start focusing on you. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, this shift can feel like a quiet emotional earthquake, not because they're suddenly abandoned, but because their sense of control over the dynamic starts to slip. They were used to being the one with the emotional upper hand, the one who stayed cool, detached, in charge of when closeness happened and when it didn't. But now you're not feeding the pattern anymore, and that shakes something in them. What avoidants often fear most isn't being alone. They actually value space and sometimes even crave solitude. What they fear deep down is emotional irrelevance. When you were always available, checking in, reaching out, trying to bridge the distance, they could stay in their comfort zone. They could retreat and still feel emotionally significant in your life. But when you pull your energy back, when you become emotionally self-sufficient and stop making them the center of your emotional world, it hits differently. That silence doesn't feel peaceful, it feels threatening. They start to feel the absence, not through confrontation or dramatic exits, but through the quiet withdrawal of your energy. I had a client who described it like this: the moment I stopped texting first, he suddenly became more curious, not in big ways, but little things. He'd ask how my day was. He'd bring up old memories. It was like he could feel the difference even though I hadn't said a word. That's the awakening that begins when you stop over-functioning. The avoidant begins to sense that the emotional pattern has shifted, and whether they realize it or not, it challenges their belief that they can retreat indefinitely and still be kept close. But here's the key: you're not doing this to provoke a reaction. You're not playing a game. You're reclaiming your emotional center. And that growth, your ability to stop chasing love and start honoring your own worth, forces the avoidant to confront their emotional habits in a way they've never had to before. So when you stop chasing, you don't just create space. You send a message without words. I'm not here to beg for closeness. I'm here for real connection. And I won't abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. That's where your power lives. And sometimes that's the moment they start to wake up. 7. The awakening triggered by authentic vulnerability. There's a very specific kind of moment that can shift everything in a relationship with an avoidantly attached person. It's not when you plead for their attention or try to prove your worth. It's not when you shut down or match their distance to protect yourself. It's when you show real raw emotion, not as a strategy, but simply as an honest expression of what you feel. This kind of vulnerability isn't loud, it's not dramatic. It's the quiet, grounded kind that says, this is where I am. I'm not hiding, I'm not blaming, I'm just being honest. And when you do that, the avoidant often freezes, not because they're rejecting you, but because they're completely disoriented. See, vulnerability is the very thing most avoidants have learned to fear. They've spent their whole lives dodging emotional intimacy, not because they don't want it, but because it feels unsafe. When you're emotionally open with no hidden agenda, it cuts right through their defenses. There's no manipulation, no expectation, just truth. And that truth becomes a mirror they're often not ready to look into. Suddenly they're faced with the thing they've tried to avoid for years, a real emotionally present human being who isn't asking for anything, just showing up. I once had a client who, instead of begging her avoidant partner to change or chasing after him during one of his silent periods, simply sent a voice note that said, "I care about you. I feel hurt by the distance. I'm not angry. I just want to be honest about where I'm at." That was it. No pressure, no guilt trip, just emotional presence. He didn't respond for days, but when he finally did, he was shaken. He told her no one had ever been that honest without trying to control or shame him. That voice note planted a seed, one that stayed with him longer than any ultimatum ever could. That's the power of authentic vulnerability. It's not weak, it's not naive, it's transformative. It forces emotional growth not by force, but by example. When you model presence without needing to fix, when you express without demanding, you become the very thing the avoidant never knew they needed: a safe emotional mirror. And sometimes that's when real connection begins, not through control, but through quiet truth. Let's wrap this up with something I hope stays with you long after the video ends. If you've ever been caught in a relationship with an avoidantly attached partner, you know how confusing, painful, and emotionally draining it can be. You've likely asked yourself more than once, do they even care, or why do they act like I mean something only to pull away the next moment? What we've explored today is a deeper, more compassionate lens through which to see avoidant behavior, not to excuse emotional unavailability, but to help you stop blaming yourself for it. We've talked about how avoidants often retreat, not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much. Their silence is a form of emotional self-protection, not always indifference. Their emotional distance is a survival strategy learned in childhood. Those breadcrumb messages, subtle check-ins, and story views, they're not just random, they're emotional Morse code, quiet signals that they're still connected to you even if they can't say it out loud. We've unpacked the push-pull dance, the quiet memory they carry even when they act like they've moved on, and the emotional crisis that happens when you stop chasing. Most importantly, we've explored the transformative power of your authentic vulnerability, the way your grounded emotional presence can become the mirror that challenges their avoidant defenses and awakens something deeper. So here's the big takeaway. Your emotional sensitivity is not the problem. When paired with boundaries, it's a strength. You're not too much. You're someone who feels deeply, loves honestly, and is learning to love without losing yourself. If your avoidant partner can meet you there, that's beautiful growth. If they can't, that's clarity, not failure. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it gave you not just understanding, but emotional relief and empowerment. If it resonated with you, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel for more grounded insights into relationships, healing, and secure attachment. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and share your thoughts or experiences. Let's make this a space where clarity and compassion coexist. You deserve connection that's safe, honest, and mutual. Keep honoring your heart and keep choosing you. Until next time, take care of yourself.